Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Mitchell, and we're going to talk about elections in Texas today. I wanted to give you a quick highlights of some of the key issues that we might not get to in class. So, first thing, Texas has a lot of elections. As mentioned before, that everything in Texas is pretty much elected except for the Secretary of State and a few boards that the governor gets to appoint. The governor of Texas is pretty important nationally, so the gubernatorial races are almost like presidential races. It's a very high profile position. Both the governor and lieutenant governor have important powers that are up for grabs and that we need to have an election over. Um, and uh, their public policy is incredibly important. Also, elections to the down ballot races are pretty critical too. So you've got city council, school boards, state education boards. Everything has really happened with these different organizations, and most of them are elected. Um, We talked about primaries in the last class. Just as a review, you have an open primary, which allows candidates from either party to participate. And we also have closed primaries, where you have to declare a party affiliation just to be able to run for office. Texas has what's called a semi-closed system, whereas you don't necessarily have to pre-declare a political party, but you have to be a political. You have once you start voting in one of the primaries, you're forbidden to join the other primary. So if you go into the election booth and you vote for Republican primary, you're stuck only voting Republican or the Republican runoffs. In the primary system, we operate on what's called a majority system. This means that one candidate has to at least get 51% of the votes. Whereas in the general election system, we have what's called a single member plurality. A single member plurality system is where you have to get the most votes. Um, in general elections, they're held in November for most public officials. However, most state officials are elected in non-presidential years. This is because they don't want them affected by the major vote. When President Obama was elected in 2008, you had more people turning out for Democrats than they've ever turned out before, and the Democrats did very, very well all across the board in Texas. Um, but if many of the key people that were elected were, state, local, those types of office, not necessarily the major legislature, judicial, statewide offices. If they had been running at the same time, you would have seen probably governor, lieutenant governor, and a couple other races would have done much better than they did. The governor has the power to call what's called a special election, which is held usually when somebody retires early. And we also talked about why independents and third parties do really poor in Texas because of ballot access rules, name recognition, resources. The math is really hard for them to, continue running for office. Okay. Um, why do people participate? One of the key issues is that you have to have some sort of benefit to be able to turn out for office. We talked about in the last class about solidary benefits, which are benefits that are for fun. We talked about policy benefits and we talked about tangible benefits. So people operate on what we call a rational choice. This means that if the cost minus or the benefits minus the cost is positive, then they're more likely to turn out. So this guy named Duncan Black came up with an equation that says that people will turn out to votes if the probability of your candidate winning and you getting some benefits out of it minus opportunity cost plus your civic duty is positive, then you're going to get a benefit out. You're going to basically turn out to vote. The problem is that there's a lot of barriers or challenges to vote. For example, oftentimes elections are on Tuesday where people have to work. You have to keep up with the politicians, what they're doing, what they stand for, and you don't have a whole lot of times to do that. So, this it's inconvenient. So oftentimes people don't turn out because it's somewhat inconvenient. a way to get people to turn out to vote is to kind of appeal to their civic duty. That, even though you might not get a whole lot of policy or tangible benefits out of it, you do get some sort of pride in that you participated in the process. So more often than not, people participate because they feel that it's part of their civic duty. I mean, this kind of seems like a duh moment, but it's kind of an important thing if you think about it. You don't get a whole lot of benefits to vote. So the way to kind of appeal to that is to get people to think about, this is part of their rights. Other forms of participation, particularly in Texas, signing petitions, protesting, writing letters. Texas, because they're so conservative, typically doesn't use some of the upper level participation, like violent protest or things of that nature. And we really don't do a whole lot of protesting in general. Usually it's the lower level, low risk types of things like voting, um, supporting a candidate, that kind of thing. Um, this is one area that you need to read very carefully in the book, talking about the different restrictions. Texas, just like the rest of the country, has expanded the number of people that is allowed to vote. So women got the right to vote in the 1920s with the 19th Amendment. Um, we also had a lot of Jim Crow laws. For example, Texas did have a poll tax. It was about $2 initially when it first came out, and was progressively higher up until the 1960s. So people were disenfranchised in that area. Texas did require what's called early registration. Um, so that you had to register far, far, far in advance before you're able to vote. So sometimes we kept people from voting that were legally able to vote. For example, Texas had a large group of migrant workers that would only come in during certain parts of the year, and they may even be here during the election, but they were forbidden to register to vote because they weren't in the county long enough. And one interesting part about this is there's a question about homeless people. Should homeless people have the same rights to vote? Of course they do. But the problem is finding out where are they registered. So this is an issue in Houston right now. They're trying to figure out how to make sure that homeless people are correctly counted in the political process because they are somewhat transient. Most of the times that you and I, when we go register to vote, we're based on our district by where we live or we reside. Homeless people may shift where they live from night to night. So they're trying to work on these things. Some of the Jim Crow laws that Texas had to deal with, the white primary, basically only whites could vote in the Democratic primary. Remember, there weren't a whole lot of Republican primaries until the 1960s, 1980s. Um, there was a character test where a prominent white person had to support your registration application. You had a literacy test and poll tax. And then, of course, the grandfather clause, which you all know that if your grandfather could vote before the Civil War, you could. This was in response to the incredible poverty and um, literacy issues in the South. So they knew that a lot of white people couldn't read either, so this was their way around it. Here's an interesting picture about the poll taxes and some of the issues that you people had to pay just to get elected. Uh, I'm going to keep moving past some of this stuff because you can read about it later. But the 14th and 15th Amendment allowed for African Americans to be able to vote, and the white primary somewhat minimized that because uh, even though African Americans could definitely vote in the general election for the most part, there wasn't a whole lot of competition. So how the white primary worked is only white people could vote in the Democratic primary, and that was the only competition. You had a bunch of Democrats running for the nomination, and no Republicans. So only whites could participate in that election, so they'll pick their candidate. And in the general election, they only had a choice of Democratic candidate X and no Republicans to vote against. So what this did is it effectively disenfranchised African American voters. And 1944, they tried to overturn white primary laws based on Smith versus Albright, and that somewhat succeeded. What's really critical, at least in recent times, is some changes to the Voting Rights Act. And this is probably where I'll end the video. And the Voting Rights Act basically got rid of poll taxes and most of the Jim Crow laws that were still left over. But there were two key issues that were left in the law to try to make up for a past history of discrimination. 4B says that places with a history of discrimination had to be 4B and 5, Section 5 said that places that had a history of discrimination had to be monitored by the federal government. What this means is that if they had uh, a problem that, or they had any sort of changes with their election laws, they had to get approved by the D.C. Circuit Court or the Department of Justice. If either of those two agencies approved it, then it went through. If not, then the law couldn't go through. Well, what happened recently in 2013 is that the Supreme Court struck down the Section 4B part of the law because the formula they used to determine a history of discrimination was outdated. So basically, this made it so that the federal government had no way to directly monitor places, these places with a historic discrimination. Within 24 hours of this being struck down, 13 states tightened their voting restrictions to try to limit who was able to vote. Um, this was very close to another election, and we're still dealing with this in Texas. For example, the voter ID law was just recently struck down in North Carolina and in Texas at the circuit court level. So this case will probably end up at the Supreme Court to determine what restrictions that people can place on the right to vote. Um, Now, Congress could go in and change the Voter Rights Act to make the law more current and fit with current issues, but the current majorities of either party have been very slow to act on this area. So Congress is just not taking it up, even though all they have to do is to basically just write a new law and fix this. Um, let's see. Um, to be able to vote in Texas, you need a photo ID still. Even though the photo ID law was struck down, you will need to have some sort of photo ID just to be able to vote. You need to be 18 years old, a U.S. citizen, and a resident for Texas for 30 days. The reason that the photo ID was an issue is that people of color may not have had access to the documents to get the photo ID, or college students may have had some issues too. Older people also may have. How you used to be able to vote is just to show up and show some sort of identification. It could have been a bill at your house. It could have been um, pretty much anything, as long as it had your name on it, or just your voter card. And the estimate when they looked at it was about 300,000 Texans were disenfranchised because of this. So that's one reason why the law went ahead, it was struck down. But please pay attention to this as the year goes on. This is a very, very important issue. All right, so I will go ahead and leave it there. We'll try to talk about some of the issues with the rest of the class on Tuesday. So good luck.